It could be the final resting place of Queen Cleopatra because she was the human representation of goddess Isis. It fit perfect with Cleopatra's story.
Octavian, claimant to the late Caesar's throne, faced the Roman Senate and denounced the Oriental seductress who had ensnared his former ally, now enemy, Mark Antony. The Roman general, he claimed, had lost his reason to her beauty. Before Antony, Julius Caesar himself, whose legacy both men contested, had also fallen for Cleopatra, last Pharaoh of Egypt. Thus, history paints an image of allure and perfection. For 2,000 years, Cleopatra VII has been remembered as the dazzling queen who bent empires with charm and intellect. Yet strip away the romance and a disturbing truth emerges. Hidden within her family's bloodline lies a biological story discussed. Cleopatra's DNA tells a terrifying tale. The queen may not be who history promised. Cleopatra's family, the Greek pharaohs of Egypt. The man who rose as the first Greek pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy I Soter, was a Macedonian Greek general, a trusted companion of Alexander the Great. After Alexander died in 323 BCE, his vast dominions splintered into rival territories ruled by former generals. Ptolemy moved decisively, seizing Egypt. Long before he crowned himself, he had already secured the loyalty of troops and the machinery of power that would sustain his rule. Ptolemy had campaigned across Asia Minor, Egypt, and the Near East under Alexander. When he declared himself king in 305 BCE and adopted the full pharaonic titulary as Ptolemy I Soter, the savior, the title was not symbolic vanity. He was no temporary governor, no foreign occupier passing through, but a ruler who intended to anchor his authority in Egypt's ancient traditions. Military control won him the land, but cultural legitimacy would keep it. The early Ptolemies understood that Egypt could not be ruled by force alone. This set the stage for a remarkable transformation. Though Macedonian Greeks by blood, they reshaped their public identity to align with Egyptian expectations of kingship. They appeared in temple reliefs dressed as pharaohs, commissioned monuments in traditional styles, and restored and expanded sacred complexes that had defined Egyptian religious life for centuries. They performed rituals, honored priesthoods, and upheld the cults of gods such as Amun, presenting themselves as successors in an unbroken line of divine kings rather than foreign usurpers. This careful performance of continuity reassured Egypt's powerful priestly elites and helped stabilize a kingdom where a small Greek ruling class governed a vast native population. At the same time, the dynasty never abandoned its Hellenistic roots. Greek remained the language of administration, law, and scholarship. The royal court preserved Macedonian customs, and Alexandria was deliberately built as a Greek city on Egyptian soil, designed to rival Athens as the intellectual capital of the Mediterranean world. Under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, Alexandria became the crown jewel of the dynasty's ambitions. The Library of Alexandria and its associated Mouseion embodied the Ptolemies' commitment to knowledge, attracting scholars, poets, scientists, and philosophers from across the Hellenistic world. This was not merely cultural patronage, it was a political strategy. By positioning themselves as guardians of Greek learning while ruling as Egyptian pharaohs, the Ptolemies claimed both Alexander's legacy and Egypt's ancient authority. For nearly 3 centuries, this dual identity sustained the dynasty. From 305 BCE until 30 BCE, when Cleopatra VII died and Egypt fell to Rome, the Ptolemies maintained one of the longest continuous reigns in the Hellenistic world. Each generation reinforced the balance between Greek innovation and Egyptian tradition, commissioning grand projects like the Pharos of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and monumental temple complexes at Edfu and Dendera that still dominate the landscape today. Yet for all their success, this carefully constructed image concealed tensions beneath the surface. The Ptolemaic dynasty was never a simple fusion of cultures, nor was its rule uncontested. This is only one half of the story. There is a much darker other side to this saga. What Cleopatra's family DNA tells us about the last ruler of the Nile. By examining mummified remains and skeletal material from Ptolemaic-era burials in Alexandria and other elite sites across Egypt, researchers have been able to reconstruct patterns of ancestry and kinship that written sources only hinted at. Both mitochondrial and nuclear DNA analyses have played a crucial role in this reconstruction. Mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal descent, shows striking continuity among female remains identified as queens or close royal relatives through inscriptions, burial goods, and tomb context. Rather than showing widespread genetic mixing with native Egyptian populations, these maternal lineages remain closely aligned with Macedonian Greek ancestry. This suggests that royal women, like royal men, were selected from within the dynasty itself. Yes, it was exactly as you imagined. They were related sometimes, even closely. Nuclear DNA extracted from teeth and dense bone fragments strengthens this conclusion. Individuals buried together in royal or elite Ptolemaic contexts display degrees of genetic relatedness that match historical accounts of sibling and first-cousin marriages. In several cases, the genetic data align almost perfectly with recorded family trees, confirming that these unions were not occasional or symbolic but systematic and sustained. The resulting genetic signature is one of unusually high homozygosity, meaning the inheritance of identical gene variants from both parents, a hallmark of repeated close-kin reproduction over multiple generations. Archaeogenetic studies from Alexandrian necropolies, including sites such as Qom el-Shukafa, reveal levels of homozygosity far exceeding those seen in contemporary Greek or Egyptian populations. These values cannot be explained by sporadic cousin marriage alone. Instead, they indicate long-term inbreeding within a small, insulated ruling group. When compared with genetic data from non-royal Egyptian cemeteries, village burials, and administrative populations, the contrast is stark. Ordinary Egyptians show genetic diversity consistent with largely outbred societies, while ancient Greek populations across the eastern Mediterranean exhibit marriage patterns that actively avoided close-kin unions. You see, in ancient Egypt, royal unions of related couples were not a social norm, but a sacred exception. The pharaoh was believed to embody Ma'at, the cosmic order that sustained the universe. Royal blood was therefore considered divine in nature, and its containment within the ruling house was viewed as a religious necessity. Sibling marriage was a ritualized act that symbolized divine completeness rather than personal choice. Mythology reinforced this worldview through deities such as Isis and Osiris, whose sibling spousal union served as the archetype for kingship. By emulating the gods, the royal family affirmed its separation from ordinary humanity. Crucially, this belief system applied almost exclusively to the throne. Legal papyri, census records, and marriage contracts demonstrate that common Egyptians typically married unrelated individuals or distant kin, and full sibling marriage among non-elites was rare and socially restricted. The taboo remained intact outside the palace walls. The Ptolemies, despite their Greek origins, adopted this Egyptian royal ideology once they assumed the title of pharaoh. In Greek society, marriage between full siblings was widely condemned and often illegal, despite its presence in myth. Macedonian Greeks followed these prohibitions before their rule in Egypt, and there is no evidence that such unions were accepted in Greek civilian life. The shift began under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, when sibling marriage became formal dynastic policy rather than cultural inheritance. This was a calculated political adaptation. By marrying women of their kin, Ptolemaic kings aligned themselves with Egyptian expectations of divine rulership, while simultaneously preventing external families from gaining influence through marriage alliances. Over nearly 3 centuries, this strategy produced a ruling house that was culturally hybrid but genetically insular, distinct from both Greek settlers and native Egyptians. However, the biological consequences of this system are difficult to ignore. Sustained consanguinity increases the likelihood that harmful recessive traits will surface, and physical evidence from Ptolemaic remains reflects this risk. Skeletal analyses have identified craniofacial asymmetries, dental abnormalities, and variations in stature consistent with inbreeding. Ancient historians such as Plutarch and Cassius Dio describe members of the dynasty as suffering from obesity, fertility issues, and other health problems that may have been intensified by genetic factors. When combined with archaeological data, these accounts form a coherent picture of a royal family paying a biological price for ideological purity. Several Ptolemaic rulers died young or struggled to produce heirs. Ptolemy VI Philometor, for example, died in his mid-30s, while queens such as Cleopatra II endured repeated reproductive crises. Although warfare, stress, and environmental conditions undoubtedly contributed, genetic vulnerability almost certainly played a role in weakening the dynasty over time. Cleopatra VII, the last and most famous of the Ptolemies, remains genetically elusive. No confirmed remains have been identified, making direct DNA analysis impossible. Any assessment of her biology must therefore rely on indirect evidence drawn from her relatives, historical descriptions, and the dynasty's documented marriage practices. Roman writers emphasize her intelligence, charisma, and political skill while offering few reliable details about her physical traits. Given the consistent pattern of sibling and close kin marriage within her family, it is reasonable to assume that Cleopatra shared the same genetic risk factors as her predecessors, including susceptibility to recessive disorders associated with high homozygosity. Comparative analysis of her siblings and ancestors suggests that she retained a largely Macedonian Greek genetic profile, despite ruling as an Egyptian pharaoh. Coins, sculptures, and reliefs provide additional clues, though these images were shaped by artistic convention and political messaging rather than strict realism. Archaeology unveils horrors of Cleopatra's family. For generations, the absence of a confirmed tomb has fueled speculation, myth-making, and persistent scholarly debate. Despite major advances in Ptolemaic archaeology, no site has yet yielded conclusive evidence that can be directly and unambiguously linked to Egypt's last queen. The search for Cleopatra's burial place remains one of the most enduring and unresolved mysteries of the ancient world, not because of a lack of effort, but because the material record has proven stubbornly indirect. Among the most intensively studied locations connected to this quest is the Temple of Osiris Magna, situated roughly 48 kilometers west of Alexandria along Egypt's Mediterranean coast. Dedicated to Osiris and Isis, deities deeply associated with death, rebirth, and royal legitimacy, the temple held particular importance during the final decades of Ptolemaic rule. Excavations there began in 2002 under the leadership of Dominican archaeologist Kathleen Martinez, working in collaboration with Egyptian authorities and international teams. The site's religious significance, combined with its prominence during Cleopatra's reign, has made it a leading candidate for a royal burial complex rather than a provincial sanctuary. Archaeological work at Osiris Magna has revealed a dense concentration of burials and artifacts dating to the late 1st century BCE. Within the surrounding necropolis, researchers have documented approximately 27 tombs and recovered 10 mummies, several of which exhibit signs of high social status. 2 individuals were buried with gilded elements and encased in elaborate cartonnage, a burial practice typically reserved for elites. These discoveries suggest that figures of considerable importance were interred at the site, though none can be definitively identified as Cleopatra or her immediate family. Material culture uncovered at the temple strengthens its association with Cleopatra's lifetime. Excavators have reported finding hundreds of coins bearing her image and name, providing a direct chronological link to her reign. These coins, alongside late Ptolemaic ceramics and statuary fragments, firmly situate the complex within the political and economic world of Cleopatra's final years. However, the presence of objects from her era does not equate to proof of her burial. This difference between evidence connected to Cleopatra's time and evidence connected to Cleopatra herself defines much of the debate. While Taposiris Magna clearly functioned as a major religious and funerary center during her rule, no inscriptions, sarcophagi, or human remains have been securely identified as belonging to the queen. Egyptologists outside Martinez's team have repeatedly emphasized that similar artifacts appear across multiple Ptolemaic sites, meaning that coins and elite burials alone cannot serve as definitive markers of a royal tomb. Early excavations at Taposiris Magna produced several high-status mummies initially thought to belong to Cleopatra's inner circle or relatives. Some were associated with gold leaf, ornate burial wrappings, and architectural features suggesting prestige. Yet subsequent examination of skeletal features, burial context, and comparative material culture demonstrated that these individuals, while elite, could not be reliably tied to the royal family. In 2022, ground-penetrating radar surveys detected extensive subterranean structures beneath the temple, including a massive underground chamber approximately 9 meters wide and an interconnected network of tunnels. Martinez and her collaborators have proposed that these spaces may have functioned as sealed burial vaults intended for high-ranking individuals. However, the chambers remain unexplored and their contents are still unknown. Underwater archaeology has complicated the picture even further. Surveys conducted near Taposiris Magna have identified submerged ports and architectural remains dating to the Ptolemaic and early Roman periods. Work involving researchers such as National Geographic explorer Bob Ballard has demonstrated that ancient coastlines and ceremonial routes now lie beneath the Mediterranean. A tunnel measuring over 1,300 meters in length appears to extend from the temple toward these submerged areas, raising new questions about whether portions of the burial landscape were deliberately hidden or later lost to rising seas and seismic events. These findings intersect with long-standing theories that Cleopatra may have been buried within Alexandria itself. Large sections of the ancient city, including its royal quarter, were destroyed or submerged following earthquakes and the catastrophic tsunami of 365 CE. If Cleopatra and Mark Antony were interred near the palace complex, as some ancient sources suggest, their tomb may now rest beneath the harbor or modern urban layers. Yet even without her remains, archaeology has significantly narrowed the gap between legend and reality. The material record now situates Cleopatra firmly within a complex religious, political, and cultural landscape, revealing how she positioned herself as both a Hellenistic monarch and an Egyptian pharaoh. While her tomb remains undiscovered, the accumulation of archaeological evidence has stripped away centuries of myth, leaving behind a clearer, more grounded image of the woman who stood at the end of Egypt's ancient royal line. So how do we know that we were wrong about Cleopatra? History versus mythology. For over 2 millennia, Cleopatra VII has captured the imagination of the world as the embodiment of beauty, seduction, and exotic power. Her story has been told and retold across art, literature, and film, but much of this depiction is rooted in myth rather than historical reality. Artists, propagandists, and filmmakers have emphasized the queen's physical allure, often obscuring the political, dynastic, and biological forces that shaped her life. Hans Macquart's 19th century painting, Cleopatra in the Tent of Antony, is a perfect example of this trend. In Macquart's vision, Cleopatra reclines luxuriously on silk cushions, her skin illuminated by the flickering glow of golden lamps. She is surrounded by a glittering array of jewelry and attended by servants who seem almost to worship her every gesture. The composition amplifies sensuality. The curve of her body, the shimmer of fabric, and the opulent richness of the setting all signal erotic magnetism. Cleopatra's power in this image derives entirely from her physical presence. The viewer is meant to marvel at her beauty and charm, not her intellect, political acumen, or dynastic strategy. Similarly, Roman accounts, particularly those propagated by Octavian during the civil wars against Mark Antony, cast Cleopatra as a dangerous foreign temptress whose very existence threatened the moral and political order of Rome. Writers such as Cassius Dio and Plutarch describe her in dramatic, almost mythical terms, emphasizing her seductive influence over Antony. Plutarch, however, offers a subtle correction to this narrative. He writes that Cleopatra's true power lay not in her physical beauty, but in her wit and charm. She could engage diplomats directly in multiple languages, a rare and remarkable ability even among contemporary monarchs. Yet Roman propaganda downplayed these qualities, deliberately framing her as a corrupting Eastern figure, a foil to Octavian's vision of Roman virtue. The same pattern carried into modern representations. Hollywood films, from 1934's Cleopatra, starring Claudette Colbert, to Elizabeth Taylor's iconic 1963 portrayal, continued to present her as a figure defined primarily by her glamour and sexuality. Taylor's Cleopatra, adorned with jewel-toned gowns, elaborate eyeliner, and a magnetic, commanding presence, captures the same eroticized ideal found in Macquart's painting. In these cinematic interpretations, her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony are dramatized as passionate love affairs. The physical beauty of Cleopatra is treated as the key to her power, rather than the political intelligence and cultural acumen that allowed her to survive and thrive in the treacherous currents of the late Hellenistic world. Yet the historical reality of Cleopatra's life presents a strikingly different picture. Cleopatra was a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Macedonian Greek royal house that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. In line with Egyptian pharaonic tradition, she married 2 of her brothers, first Ptolemy XIII and later Ptolemy XIV, not for romantic reasons, but to consolidate political authority and secure her claim to the throne. These sibling marriages, though shocking to Greek sensibilities, were a calculated strategy meant to preserve the perceived purity of the royal bloodline and align the ruling family with ancient religious expectations of kingship. Modern genetic studies have confirmed the increased risk of recessive disorders in her family, craniofacial asymmetries, dental irregularities, and reproductive complications. While Cleopatra's own DNA has not been recovered, the biological context of her family makes it highly likely that she shared these vulnerabilities. Historical sources provide hints of the consequences. Plutarch notes that several members of her family suffered from poor health and early deaths, and Cassius Dio describes certain Ptolemies as obese and prone to reproductive difficulties. The glamorous Cleopatra of art and film is thus sharply contrasted with the biologically constrained reality of a queen whose family practices had tangible effects on her physical and reproductive health. Numismatic evidence and contemporary portraiture offer further insight into the historical Cleopatra, contradicting the idealized images of later imagination. Coins from her reign depict a woman with a strong nose, prominent jawline, and angular features, typical of Macedonian Greek royal portraiture. These images emphasize authority, lineage, and seriousness, rather than beauty or sensuality. In the Hellenistic world, royal imagery was a tool of political communication. Portraits projected legitimacy, dynastic continuity, and sovereign power. Cleopatra's coinage aligns with this tradition, portraying her as a shrewd and capable ruler rather than a romanticized temptress. Cleopatra of legend and the Cleopatra of history are profoundly different. The myths emphasize beauty, seduction, and exoticism, often ignoring the intellectual, political, and genetic realities of her life. The scientific and historical evidence, by contrast, presents a woman whose power derived from intelligence, strategy, and cultural fluency, yet whose life was constrained by the same dynastic practices that ensured her family's continuity. Cleopatra was a queen of unmatched political skill, navigating a volatile world, yet she was also shaped by the genetic and dynastic legacies of her lineage. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.